Talk.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Now then, welcome back. They are just getting underway in the Carabao Cup. Arsenal, Manchester City, second game of the evening already this evening. Newcastle United beaten by Brentford 1-0, which was not the plan, Newcastle. So Arsenal, Manchester City just kicking off. In fact, as I speak, and we are 2 minutes into the game, well, it's just the way life is going for Mikel Arteta. Arsenal are 1 down already. Goal coming on 3 minutes. Gabriel Jesus has put Manchester City 1-0 up. So the misery continues for Arteta, you suspect. Arsenal at home this evening as well in that game. Now, for something of a GAA 2020 State of the Union, glance back, All-Ireland final fallout chat, we are joined by Mick Foley of the Sunday Times. Colm of the Irish Independent is with us as well. Just a brief glance back at Saturday's final for a moment, Mick. Did it have the veneer of competitiveness as opposed to actual competitiveness, or do you think it was, in the melting pot, Mayo had a chance kind of a vibe?
Yeah, in fairness, you can't say it had the veneer of competitiveness when Mayo were only a point behind, but however, going into the last quarter, no.
I can a bit. It did, though.
No, I don't think so.
Did you think Mayo were in it, yeah?
Well, I put it this way: the game went more or less the way I expected it to, in the sense that I thought Mayo would bring Dublin somewhere very uncomfortable, but I never really thought coming into the game that they'd probably have, I suppose, the wherewithal and the depth to close it out. So in that regard, you could say, yeah, look, it went as we expected. But at the same time, when you're in it, and you're looking down and going, geez. Mayo haven't actually really. They've played well, but they can play better, and they're still only a point behind. So let's just see what happens here for the last quarter. But obviously, Dublin made the changes, and their game management again was just so good. And I think looking back from my side of things, I think Mayo just didn't bring the bit of rogue that they were going to have to bring to unsettle Dublin. I personally thought that the rogue might be a Tommy Conroy or someone like that. That Tommy was something that Mayo maybe hadn't had down the years. Expected them to play exactly how they played. I don't think they threw anything at Dublin that would have surprised Dublin in terms of the way they set up and the way they went about it. But when you weren't getting the spread of scores from outside of Cillian O'Connor, that kind of pretty much kind of settled things. But I think in terms of competitiveness, I think in the context of how they played, I think Mayo did well. I have to say, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I actually think there was probably a bit more in them that we didn't see. But there we go. Look, the Dubs. This is what the Dubs do. They're able to stand back and look at an opposition and look at a game and figure out what they need to do to win it.
Yeah, Colm, Mayo 2 points down at half-time, but Dublin with 14 men for 10 minutes at the start of the second half, or Mayo equalising on 50 minutes. Did your heart rate start to pick up a touch, or were you always fairly certain of how this was going?
No, I suppose if both teams had just landed in Croke Park and we didn't know about previous form, you might think, well, maybe, just maybe, there's something on here. But I always look to the bench, and if you look at the past history in these games, you look at the impact Dublin substitutes have made, going back to Owen O'Gara even coming off the bench in 2013, Cormac Costello in 16, Kevin McMenamin in 2015 came off the bench and scored a goal in the replay. And even in 2017, then there was the intervention from Diarmuid Connolly. So all the time they have these shots in their locker, so to speak. And this time they had Brian Howard in reserve. And what a game he played. I mean, for him to come off the bench and just completely anchor Dublin in the way that he did, he just brought stability. And Michael mentioned game management. Well, a lot of the game management actually went through Brian Howard, more so this time than Kieran Kilkenny and Brian Fenton, who normally it would go through. Now, Fenton and Kilkenny were key drivers, as they are, of this team. But I think the fact that Howard was able to come off and play as well as he did and just bring a calm authority, that was probably missing a little bit there for Dublin in the opening half. And once again, the bench has made a considerable difference to Dublin, and that is almost always the case. They stay going for longer because, when you go into the late teens in terms of numbers and into the 20s even, they just get stronger and stronger by comparison to everyone else.
Yes, Mick, we were like frogs in slowly boiling water this time around, as opposed to 2019 when there was the 12-minute salvo, and you couldn't but be amazed. It was dramatic. Here, it was just drip, drip, drip. I think there was Niall Scully won a free. It's popped over by Rock. You don't think much of it. Howard kicks a nice point. Mannion does kick a great point, to be fair. Kilkenny kicks a routine point. Suddenly there's another free. Oh my God, they're 5 points up. There's 10 minutes to go. The game is over.
Yeah, no,
we're boiling.
It's slow boiling frogs is right. It's it's kind of like death by 1,000 marks. It's just kind of slowly, and they're gone. And again, it's the nature of how Dublin have evolved their play. You could even see it when they were walking through teams, earlier in the season. It was the same. It was just this kind of drip, 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 and then they're gone. It's the way, as I said, it's the way they've evolved. I mean, if you go back to 2013 and the Harlem Globetrotter year, and kind of how it's gone from there through 2014, the lessons learned, 15, 16, how they handle Mayo now. I mean, I would imagine they were going into that game knowing that Mayo would bring hell down on top of them in different ways. And I'm thinking in terms of physicality, in terms of athleticism, hard running and power, and how, again, game management, how are we going to manage this? Dublin tend to just manage teams now. It's not even a case of sort of going out and blitzing you now. That said, I mean, obviously they score a goal inside of 13 seconds, which is, I suppose, the definition of getting blitzed. Mm-hmm. But again, even in that, that really frustrated me watching that, because, I mean, that's the third time now that Mayo have conceded a goal in an All-Ireland final inside the first couple of minutes since 2012, which to me is unforgivable. It's absolutely unforgivable. It's one thing for it to happen and say, well, just didn't see that coming, This has happened to you people twice before. Also, Dublin tried that play off the throw-in if the conditions are right. I saw them scoring a goal against Laois 5 years ago, exact same thing. It's not new. So, again, as I said just at the top, there were things that Mayo should have done that could have made things a lot different for them. And particularly, I mean, the goals were just killers, absolute killers. Yeah. And again, this isn't taken away from, I mean, Dublin were the better team, obviously, and just fully deserved, and they were 5 points the better team. But there were circumstances in the game that Mayo maybe could have handled a bit better, and that could have got him a hell of a lot closer.
So, look, these chats can get unwieldy. In broad terms, the three areas to touch on are firstly, let's diagnose the extent of this problem. Just how dominant are Dublin, and how likely is it to continue in this vein? Secondly, I guess we can call that the recrimination section. How much of the GAA fed into this with their money? We can get angry for a few minutes, point some fingers. And then thirdly, solutions. And that's where we get into tricky territory, because the solutions section of the chat is not the straightforward one. On the diagnosing the extent of the problem column, to what extent is there a sliding doors power of momentum about this situation? What I mean by that is, yes, Dublin destroy all before them in Leinster at the moment. So Leinster Championship is not even on life support anymore, it's dead. But in terms of just winning All-Irelands, and 2011, and I know there's an appreciable difference between, as Mick says, the control they have now versus 2011. But 2011, they win the final by a point. 2013, they win the final by a point. 2015, they're behind against Mayo in the semi-final and Russell up 3 late goals and come through and make a final. And yes, they beat Kerry by 3 points in the rain that day. Back to 2016, they draw against Mayo, and looked in real trouble, and they only win the replay by a point. 2017, Mayo really should have won that game, you feel, and it's Dublin who do it by a point. Yes, Tyrone is a dud in 18. 2019 last year, massive trouble. Admittedly, they win the replay by 6, but massive trouble. And then this year, I mean, I guess I wanted to get your sense of the game. It's not a dud, but ultimately they win by 5 and they're very comfortable. So, there's this is not, if this column was the Tyrone final of 18 over and over and over again, then we have a massive problem, a massive problem. They are just getting over the line. Now, it's dead to be them that get over the line, but they are just, Colm, getting over the line. So is there any way we're overreacting to their quote-unquote dominance against the teams that make the finals against them, as opposed to the Kildare-Meath situation, which we can come to later?
Possibly slightly. You've put forward a very, very good case there, Joe. That's for sure. Possibly slightly. But you must take the last 3. in isolation, and that they've won that Tyrone game, that Tyrone All-Ireland final, with that blitz. Those 2 goals just straight away turned that game. And it was over. And there was no sense that Tyrone were going to come back and win that. And similarly, after half-time, again, from a throw-in, Michael referenced their work from a throw-in, or Owen Merchant blazes through the heart of the Kerry defence. And again, you're left with that feeling, this is effectively over now, albeit Stephen O'Brien did have a good goal chance there afterwards. And that was obviously in a replay after they had lost Johnny Cooper. Had they not lost Johnny Cooper to a red card, and red cards obviously are part of the game, sure. I feel they probably would have won that drawn game as comfortably, perhaps. So this year, they were comfortable again. There's no getting away from the last 3 when you strip out the replay, and they were in trouble, but in the last 3 All-Ireland finals that they have won, they have been comfortable. And it certainly seems to me that their best players are getting better. And by that, I mean Fenton, Kilkenny, Con O'Callaghan, even James McCarthy is maintaining a standard there that is so high over the last decade. But again, maybe even getting better. Maybe not the leap in James McCarthy is as great as Fenton, Kilkenny, O'Callaghan. And now we have Brian Howard, albeit he was a bit better. So their central players are certainly a great deal ahead of the bulk of other players in that regard. And the way they play the game is a little bit different. I mean, we've spoken there about game management. They are designed to retain the ball for a long, long time. They went something like 2:44, 2:45, 2 minutes 45 seconds last year before Paul Mannion kicked a point, just keeping Kerry at arm's length. And they do that so well. So they really set themselves up to control games, and they do control most of the games. They controlled that last quarter of the All-Ireland final. Last Saturday even, they controlled it. So maybe, depending on the opposition, they exert a lot more control. I feel they are currently in a stronger position now than they were at the beginning of this cycle. I thought around 2016, 2017, they certainly were not as strong. But O'Callaghan, Howard, on top of Kilkenny and Fenton developing in that regard. And also we're seeing Niall Scully come to the fore. I really feel they're driving it on. I don't believe the Mayo team is as good as it was. I think that's pretty accepted. And Kerry are really struggling to convert the underage talent. And maybe we've overestimated the underage talent that won the 5 All-Ireland titles in Kerry. I still think they're probably the best bet to bridge this gap. I also see a good Tyrone forward line next year getting together if they get everybody out and back and fit in well. That has a lot of promise. But it's a 7-month turnaround to a 7th in a row. 7 months in the greater scheme of things is to an All-Ireland final is not a lot of time for them to fragment or to stop and think about things. There's no one going to be going off travelling in the short term. So their option is to fill their void over the next few months is to get back on the training pitch and get at it again. And slowly but surely, Dublin will build that momentum to put themselves in the strongest position again. Okay. After that, we can maybe draw a breath, but I think we are looking at potentially a 7 in a row here, given the short time frame.
Yeah. Mick, do you pretty much agree with that, or is there any stock in the fact that a lot of these All-Ireland finals have been close?
I think there's stock in it, all right. Like, I mean, I think Colm is on the general point about 7 in a row. I think he's right. Dublin are in the box seat for even just for take all the other stuff out of it, just for that reason alone, that it's a short turnaround. Again, this is where the geography comes into it. Like, I was thinking of Mayo, for example. I mean, one of the things that has always helped Mayo down the years to keep it going has been having that summer with everybody home. You're going to have a lot of counties now aren't going to have their guys necessarily at home. Now, obviously, we're in a, who knows what kind of situations we're going to be in, where people are going to have to be, depending on graded lockdowns and so on and so forth. But by and large, you would imagine that it all suits Dublin. I think the point is very well made, like, about the competition and their competitors. And I think it's also good that you've kind of divided up the whole thing, because I think sometimes when we talk about Dublin and we talk about dominance, a lot of different arguments get conflated into one, and you could be talking about one particular aspect of the issue and it gets kind of jumped on as talking about a different part of the issue. I think in terms of stopping Dublin, the senior team right now, which I think is one different issue, you have to look at their nearest competitors. Finance and all that, structures and all other stuff is a different conversation about different issues. But just in terms of 7, 8 in a row, I think the guys who are nearest to them have to look at themselves. I mean, Kerry, it's not that long ago when it was a little bit like the silent minority that vote for Trump. There was a lot of people out there who reckon Kerry were going to turn Dublin over this year. there was a lot of people as the year evolved, and particularly the autumn time, coming into the autumn, thought Donegal were going to get to an All-Ireland semi-final and give them a right old run.
Yeah.
Both of those teams, effectively, by their standards, failed this year, right? Donegal now have big questions in terms of these games that they need to win to make the next step. This is about the third time now that they've fallen short when there's been a game in front of them that they need to win to make a leap. Kerry obviously must be in the absolute horrors for the last month or so around how things turned out. What would it have been like with the back door with Kerry coming back through it? God only knows. Colm's absolutely right. Kerry are the team that are most likely. In these things, I think you have to look back, even though we're in a different world of football now, you have to look back to some degree of tradition and look and see, okay, who's going to take Dublin down? It's going to be Kerry. It's definitely going to be Kerry. So where are they? Have they fallen back that far? I personally don't think they have. I think Colm is right. There's a job of work there for the players and the management as well to see, are we maximising what we got? Because they have tremendous talent and they have tremendous resources and tremendous depth there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of trying to get it right. And you know what? The fast turnaround might help Kerry because they won't have time to dwell on it. So look, who sees? I'd be with Colm. I think the 7 is on. Only purely because of the scheduling situation. I'd like to. It might be a different conversation in 2022.
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt those counties need to get their act together. We're never going to get to a point, by the way, where there are 12, 15 counties likely to win the All-Ireland. I'm not sure we were ever there. Even, the open days of the 90s when it felt very open, we weren't there. Okay, so that's diagnosing the problem. You're both pretty sure Dublin are dominant despite some tight finals. Moving on to recrimination, this is the briefest section because this has been played out a lot. So we've done the diagnosis, we're on to recrimination before some solutions. Who's to blame here, Colm? The funding figures, we're all very familiar with them at this stage. Per registered player 07 to 18, the registered player in Mayo got €22, Tyrone 21, Dublin 270 per player is out there. In just broad terms, GAA funding between 07 and 19, Dublin got 19 million, Cork were second on the list with 2 million, and then everybody else under $1 million. Now, before anyone texts in, Dublin fans, they will say in 2018 they got 22% of central GAA funds, which is not the full picture, but for a point of simplicity here. Dublin got 22% in 18. They have 28% of the population. So Dublin fans will say, come on. And it's not like land is cheap or facilities are cheap. And do we want Dublin GAA to go to rack and ruin? What's the plan here to stop funding Dublin GAA? But on the recrimination point column, the GAA themselves, Tom Ryan has admitted, okay, things maybe got a bit out of hand. And it coincided with Dublin harnessing their commercial possibilities as well. Have the GAA made a mess of this in the way they've approached Dublin?
Well, if you go back to 2004, before this plan was put in place and the funding was procured, I think it was Sean Kelly was GAA president at the time, and obviously Bertie Ahern was Taoiseach, and all of those things came together. So if you go back to then, it probably seemed like the right idea. But by then, even before the money came, or let's say the state money came for coaching and games development, Dublin were already organising themselves at coaching level in a very serious and significant way, and you could see that through the late 90s. I mean, I remember a time at the beginning of the 1990s when Dublin didn't even contest the Leinster Under-21 Championship. They didn't put a team in for a few years. Now that changed, and obviously through development squads, they were up and running before the money came. The money has been obviously hugely beneficial. I'm just curious about the per head of registered player and those figures that obviously have been in circulation, because the way that the GAA distribute that money has changed in that, or how they document it has changed. This is a very small point, but most of the other counties would have got their money for coaching games development through the provinces. Dublin get theirs directly, albeit there is a big contribution from Leinster. So the percentages, I'm not sure whether those percentages contain the provincial money or it's just from central funds. So I'm just not sure about those figures at the moment. I presume.
I don't think they do.
Right,
no, I don't think they do. I don't think the gap is as stark as outlined by those figures.
It's something I'd like to go over at some stage in the future with those figures to see, are the provincial council contributions to those counties included, all that? Because it is an important point.
Yeah. No, I think there's about 16 million not accounted for in that chat.
is it taken out of the back of the Congress booklet, the booklet that goes to Congress with the accounts there?
Yeah.
It's documented. But anyway, that's a small point. It's a very substantial amount of money being funneled into one county. And while the population argument, the per capita, all that is very sound, it does funnel out into one county team at the end of it. And at the end of it, one county team, not a number of county teams, are the beneficiaries of all of this.
Yeah.
I would think that having contributed so much money to coaching games development, I think there's a lot of clubs, and I think there's a lot of self-sustainability in Dublin at this stage. They earned close to 1.5. They are earning close to 1.5 million on a commercial basis. That is more than double their nearest competitors. And while they have places that they need to set that money aside for, the amount of money that they spend in the preparation of their inter-county teams is also among the highest. It's 1.4, 1.5 million, something like that, for all their teams. The difference is they don't have the same travel expenses as a Mayo or a Galway or a Donegal or any of those who have to, bring players over and back across the country and all of that, and have to come down and stay in Dublin for games and all of those things. So they are able to channel a lot of their own money into the preparation of their of their teams. So yes, it is wrong for anyone to say that the money makes no difference. Of course it makes a difference, on top of the talent and on top of the hard work and all of those things. And it's the perfect storm for everybody else in that they're now suffering. So really, we probably discussed this before, Joe, and we certainly did a month ago and in the past. If we're having this conversation again in 5 years' time, beyond Fenton, Kilkenny and Con O'Callaghan, well, then there really, really, really is a problem. I mean, there's probably really is a problem for the rest of the country and for the GAA with regard to the strength of Dublin. But if we're having this conversation again, so I do think there is room for some of that money to be stripped back, because I believe a lot of the clubs that are benefiting from having games promotions officers half paid by the county board through this vehicle of state funding and through GAA funding, I do believe it can be stripped back, and maybe it can be set aside to other counties. That's if these other counties can manage it properly. And obviously that's another question.
Yeah. Mick, you can have your go at recrimination here. Is there somebody that needs to be held account before we move on to the solution section?
I think there's no point really. The ship has sailed, you know what I mean? It's happened. I think John Kennellan's, one of John Kennellan's point in his letter there a few weeks ago was interesting about means testing clubs to see, well, do you really need what you're looking for? When you consider the largesse of some clubs in Dublin compared to clubs down the country. That's a pretty big administrative ask, but that's where we're at now. I think Colm is right. If we're still here in 5 years' time talking about this, well then I think the GAA will have. But you know what? It won't be even questions they have to ask. It'll just have happened. The ship will properly have sailed. I think in the overall though, it has to be said that, like a lot of sports organisations, cultural, social organisations, the GAA are reactive to what's happening around them. They can only be reactive in the sense that if you've got a population moving east, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
In terms of trying to, equalize your competition, change your structures. I mean, fundamentally, I find a lot of the arguments and debates around the Dublin thing are kind of undermined by the fact that we have a county system and a provincial structure and a provincial system. It doesn't matter what you do. Dublin are always going to have these advantages. Now, that brings us around to splitting Dublin and all this sort of stuff. I've said for a long time that I think splitting is inevitable, but I don't necessarily think it's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years, but I think it will eventually happen.
All right, okay.
Because there will be a generation of administrators and people in the GAA who will have grown up in this environment. Like we didn't, but the next group in the next bunch of years will probably have a completely different perspective on this. Also, that population drift ain't going to stop.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not like we're going to start repopulating West Mayo and West Kerry anytime soon.
Okay. So,
it's going to happen, but it's just, again, the GAA are only going to be able to be reactive to what's happening around them. And that's always been the case, which sort of, it changes. I think it changes the debate around Dublin a little bit when you think of it in those terms,
Okay, well, so you're a splitter. We're going to have splitters and anti-splitters going forward. It'll be like anti-vaxxers and vaxxers. So here's a few texts in, and there's a huge reaction, as you can imagine. Then we can get into both your solutions. Somebody asked, for instance, would Dublin beat a best of the rest of Ireland 15 right now? It's an interesting question. Some other text. If you're a Dublin player, administrator or supporter, it's almost impossible to argue against the status quo. It's counterintuitive. But any objective assessment of the inter-county football competition can only conclude Dublin's advantage in population, finance, home advantage, training locally is just not a viable sporting contest. No other county can come close to Dublin in any of those categories. The joy of winning in All-Ireland is waning for Dublin fans each year, whilst the interest in other counties is failing, without a doubt, says Tony in Athlone. Phil says, so lads, why can't Dublin develop a hurling team that dominates in the same way their footballers can? Logic would suggest they should be able to do the same in hurling. Porrick says, lads, I'm not having this split Dublin and population argument, nor the finance as the sole reason. What about the hurlers? Huge investment, same population, but stagnant.
They've done very well.
Porrick.
The hurlers have done well.
I mean,
I don't have the numbers. I don't have the stuff in front of me right here, right now. But I mean, if you compare the 10 years that Dublin have had compared to the previous 10 or 20 years, it's been bloody good. Like, they've won a Leinster title. They've got to an All-Ireland semi-final. Their underage teams have done well. I mean, there has been improvement there. But it just
maybe we could maybe if Con O'Callaghan moved over, transferred over, it could just balance things up a little bit. But I think in 10 years' time, I think we will see a big improvement in the fortunes of the Dublin hurling teams. I think in 10 years' time, give it more time. I mean, football is obviously the more established game, and it's the preference for some of the best players like Con O'Callaghan and Kieran Kilkenny, Cormac Costello, Dermot Conley, all of those players that could have hurled, given the choice, they've gone with the footballers, and it has to be a choice because there's no facility for dual players anymore. But I do think Dublin hurling will inevitably come strong. So give it time, and yes, it will. But Michael's point about rural depopulation and migration to the east and just the demographics, even stripping out the current success, I do think it's something the GAA has to be looking at. I mean, the inter-county structure has for a long time been the GAA's greatest strength, but it could turn out to be its greatest weakness in time if it's allowed to continue in this way. And obviously, some of the texters have referenced that too. But are the current demographics, are they designed for an inter-county game? That's questionable in the much longer term, given the way that the population is going.
So, okay. Sorry, Mick.
No, sorry, man. No, I just one very small thing on that. Like, I mean, that competitiveness argument as well. I mean, how competitive do we want it to be? I did a very quick thought yesterday, just in terms of Dublin Leinster Championship, right? Meath and they hockeyed Westmeath and Laois this year, right? In 136 years, right? Westmeath and Laois combined total of wins over Dublin in the championship 8, right? Meath have beaten Dublin 19 times in 63 championship games, and this is a storied rivalry. Like.
So why do we all feel it's getting so much worse then, Mick? It is getting worse, no?
I think it's the margins probably is one thing. I think also it's the wider. There's more conversation about it. There's more inter-county games. Back the years, you'd have one knockout game, Dublin Westmeath, Dublin and clean off Westmeath, and we'd all move on with our lives. But now it's more. But also you have obviously the fact that within our lifetime, okay, we can remember Westmeath beating Dublin, we can remember Laois beating Dublin, we can remember Kildare beating Dublin. So there's this sense that, well, why can't we get back to that? That was an outlier, right? Dublin also had their weak times. In the late 60s, early 70s as well. But by and large, again, I don't, it's a hackneyed old thing, but like you just count up the number of All-Irelands Dublin and Kerry have together. The third team in that roll of honour is Galway, who only have 9, right? So, I mean, I come back again to, I mean, Colm said it there, like the inter-county structure itself in terms of providing equitable competition has never really been fit for purpose.
Sure.
It's a camel of a competition. It's a committee created competition that kind of ticks the majority boxes for a lot of counties, but not all the boxes. But now that you have a Dublin with these advantages that they're really ramping it all up, we're seeing real cracks in it. But the point is, I mean, and look, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want to go around tomorrow morning and break up Dublin in 3 and have it all going. I mean, that would be hugely damaging for the GAA as well. I'm just saying that the reality of what's going on in the world is probably going to trigger a splitting somewhere down the track. Because if we want to talk about splitting Dublin, well, then I guarantee you we're going to be talking about splitting Cork at some stage, and we're going to be talking about these mad idea of amalgamations and stuff. So that's what I'm saying. That aspect is probably a conversation for another generation entirely, who are going to grow up with these issues,
yes,
and see them play out however they're going to play out in the next 10 to 15, 20 years.
And so you do, Mick, think we're talking, what, 20, 30 years away as opposed to 10? Because I must say, strategically, I think the population is the biggest issue. I think we'll rectify the finances a little bit, and some other golden generations will come along in Mayo and Donegal and Kerry, and they'll win their 2 or 3 All-Irelands a decade, and odds are Dublin will win 6 or 7. But I mean, is 6 or 7 Dublin All-Irelands a decade a palatable kind of situation? Yeah, look, there's a degree of everyone out to beat the Dubs, but like is that okay in some ways? Like, they have the biggest population, so maybe 6, 7 a decade is kind of a semi-palatable situation. Because I've got to say, the Kildare person in me does not get that excited at the thought of beating Dublin North or Dublin Coast or Dublin West or whatever we're doing. Because, if you say split, we ain't talking split in 2 here, because then you still have the 2 biggest populations in the country. You're talking splitting Dublin into 4 if you're looking for a solution which doesn't guarantee you a Dublin North versus Dublin South final very, very soon. Like, we are talking splitting Dublin into 3 to 4, which, like, does the Cork person in you fancy beating Dublin Coastal?
Listen, the Cork person in me just fancies winning All-Ireland football title whatever hell way we can. I don't care who we beat. But
it's an awful thought, isn't it? It's a real failure.
Look, I think, to be honest with you, and again, I want to emphasise that I am talking about decades down the track, and I am talking about something that would probably be inevitable because of population shift. It won't be a policy decision by the GAA. You know what I mean? The GAA are highly unlikely to turn around in the near future and say, we think that splitting up the Dublin senior team is the best thing for Dublin and the wider GAA, because it probably isn't when you really boil it down. It would seriously impact on identity for the GAA in Dublin, and as you say, it would really dilute for an awful lot of teams, for all teams, I would say, the experience of playing Dublin, and it would dilute it because it's what we were growing up with and it's what we know. That's my point, is that for the group that come next, I think Colm might have said it either on this show or I'm sure he's written it, that the idea of splitting them at underage is an interesting concept. But again, I don't necessarily think that's something that will happen anytime soon. Again, the political will isn't there to do it anyway. It's almost a redundant discussion to have about splitting Dublin, because it's something that's so unlikely to happen, I think. More likely, you mentioned the 6 to 7 All-Irelands a decade. I think that's close enough to doomsday, to be fair. I wouldn't fancy that myself, but you're looking again at other counties. I mean, a county like Cork, for example, who haven't threatened in really since in the last 7 years, you could say, since 2012, 2013, and who hadn't really threatened for a stretch before that either, before their All-Ireland 2010, going back into the sort of mid-late 90s as an All-Ireland force. You look at a county like that and you wonder, is what's going on there now, is it possible? Because, I mean, they're the only county outside of Dublin with the tradition, the resources and the population to absolutely wipe Dublin if they actually got everything going. So it's possible that you could have, in time, if Cork got it together, Cork, Kerry, Dublin, I think Mayo have put down the platform now for themselves to stay at a level, a bit like Tyrone did in the noughties, where they put the platform down to keep themselves in the top 4 or 5 the whole time. I think for a lot of other counties, I think Limerick and hurling, in terms of development and for, kind of taking what they had and making the absolute most of it and even more, I think there's something there for counties. I'm just talking in terms of short term. When I say short term, I mean 10 years. To try and limit that idea of Dublin winning 6 All-Irelands out of 10 or whatever we want to say. I think there is scope for counties still to come forward. I think Colm is right when he said at the very top there. This group, the kind of the team of Con, Fenton, Kilkenny, they're all, well, Fenton and Kilkenny are both 27 now. They're at this is their peak now. We may well have 5-6 more years of them. We don't know what's coming next, right? We can look at the most recent under 20, 21 teams and go, Yeah, they're definitely not the quality of the 2011 minors that would have given us, Kilkenny have given us about 11 or 12 players off that team, plus Fenton, who didn't play. It would have been his minor year. So, I mean, that was an exceptional group to come off of there. But, you know, what's the next row going to be like? We don't know. And I think for people to be getting, I think sometimes people get very anxious about it, quite rightly so, but I think we just need to take a breath sometimes and say, okay, well, the structures, the inter-county structure itself, the structure of the competitions, they will always limit what we can do in terms of improving the competitiveness of the entire country in terms of football. It's always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So let's look at what happened historically. Where are we relative to that? And yes, we are in uncharted waters, clearly, but I don't quite think it's gone that far out to sea that it's gone yet.
Okay.
But changes need to happen.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely accepting that point. Final word to you, Colm. I wonder, we're embarking now on the 20s. If Dublin wins 6 to 7 across the 20s, very possible. Is that so unpalatable to people that, you know, Mick's talking about decades ahead, there's just going to have to be a split at the nature of population and demographics? Another decade of 6-7 for Dublin, do you think we're sitting here and, you know, 7-8 years goes by quickly and the split conversation is a hell of a lot louder?
We were definitely having this conversation in 2015. That this was a live and relevant conversation in 2015, and Dublin were only at the beginning of this cycle, or, you know, they had won obviously 2, but there were clear signs even with the 3 under 21 successes at the beginning in the first half of this decade that there was something very, very serious happening here. Whoever thought it would be 5 and then 6 in a row? I certainly didn't. I thought there'd be a top 2 team throughout. And as we said, it's, you know, there's a very, very good chance there'll be 7. They may be caught in the year after that. You know, we're saying, you know, beyond Fenton and Kilkenny and Con, what's coming after that. I just don't think, and again, we don't have the full picture. We don't have full vision of this. I don't think that maybe there are as good coming on, and that made them bring them back to the pack, allied to the fact that I do think Kerry and Tyrone, you know, I also think Galway is a big brand, but how far are they away at the moment? They're coming from a much lower base. If you were talking about 6 or 7 All-Irelands in this decade, then the conversation around the split. And I did actually say at underage level, I do think that Leinster should be looking at dividing Dublin at underage level. Initially for 5 year blocks at minor and under 20 to see that it works out. It could have the adverse effect of making even stronger teams, and that more players will be getting access to inter-county preparation at underage level and make them even stronger. But, you know, you got to try something here, because Leinster, you know, we're talking about, has the ship sailed? It certainly sailed in Leinster. Who couldn't see the Leinster Championship being competitive in the short term, or even the medium term? I mean, you know, there are some decent underage teams in Meath, but how do they convert? And there have been in Kildare at minor level, but stepping up to under 20, they haven't been able to make that jump. Plenty of coaches in both Meath and Kildare. Meath have 20 coaches, something like that. Maybe in the next 5 years, the fruits of that will begin to surface. You might see something, but Dublin's standards are so high that it's an almost impossible job at this stage for Meath and Kildare in Leinster, or any of the other counties for that matter, to make that leap. So, you know, will Dublin go through the decade without losing a Leinster title? There's a fair chance they will. With regard to All-Irelands, yes, for sure. If they reel off another 6 or 7 in this decade, the momentum for division will certainly increase, because then beyond Fenton, Kilkenny and Con, it's quite clear that this isn't even a once in a generation or a twice in a generation. It's just a recurring theme, a repetitive cycle of great players coming along from the biggest population with close access to the best of facilities and the best of expertise and everything like that. And at that stage, you really are looking at far more drastic action. So rather than being 2 decades up, I think it's probably, you know, at the end of this decade, will really tell a tale from that point of view.
Okay, Colm Keys of the Irish Independent, Mick Foley of the Sunday Times. 1, have a great Christmas. 2, don't check your Twitter mentions for a couple of hours, and we'll talk to you when we talk to you. All right, thanks, fellas. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Happy Christmas to you both.
Christmas,
Bye-bye.
Joe, yeah.
Off the ball on News Talk. News Talk Breakfast.
You have to have your toast very hot. You have to have too much butter. You go all the way to the edges.
My wife sent toast back. I was delivering up toast to her the other day. She went, that's not right.
It's dead right.
There's not enough butter on the
Toast
edges.
is
I
fictitious.
hate toast that's not cooked enough. That's like bread.
That's
when I
white,
put it back.
kind of.
Yeah.
It has to be the right colour. The butter has to go on. There has to be enough butter. It has to go on hot so that it melts. A slick of greasy butter on the top is gross.
Okay, it's only the big